Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. For those of you who don't know, my name is Leo, and I will be your host today on a little ride. We're going to take us a little ride on the Wayback Train. We got a story to tell you guys today. Now, I came out here and I figured I'd open my video here. Where we're going is really close to this place, and I'll show you why we started here in a second. But I am at, I would imagine, if you're watching our channel, a lot of you are probably familiar with the Hatfield-McCoy feud. I am at Aunt Betty's house from the Hatfield-McCoy feud. This is where Rosanna and when Rosanna and Johnsy got together, their little ill-fated love affair, she ran, I should say, not him. And she went to Aunt Betty's house and stayed with Aunt Betty and had the baby. And of course, Johnsy married her cousin a little bit later, and the baby passed away, and it's just a really tragic story. But the baby, Rosanna and Johnsy's baby from the Hatfield-McCoy feud, is right at the top of those stairs. And Aunt Betty and Uriah, they are right over here. You go up that little road right over there, and it goes straight up the hill and circles back up to the top where the McCoy family graveyard is. That's where Aunt Betty and Uriah McCoy are buried at. Now the house right there, their old house, it used to sit over here, but the river gets up and, you know, floods it and all that kind of stuff. So it was moved a few decades ago to where it sits now. But during Rosanna's day, it would have been over here. But we are not actually here for a story about the Hatfields and McCoys. We are here today for a story about one of Aunt Betty and Uriah's neighbors, as a matter of fact. People lived right up here, right around this little curve. Well, I'm a-getting there, y'all. I'm about halfway up the hill. That fence up there is where I'm headed. And this is how far I've made it so far. But you can see all the dogwoods and stuff starting to bloom. Getting pretty out here. It won't be long. All this will be green and pretty. But anyway, I guess for now, I just stopped to take me a quick 5-minute break, catch my breath, and head on up the hill. Tell you guys a story. Well, we've made it to the top of the hill and found the grave that we're looking for. There's actually two. I'm going to be telling you a little bit about this one right here, and then Heather's going to tell you a little bit about that one right down there. But as far as our coal mining, this right here is the grave that we came to find today. This is George Ezra Phillips, born in 1890 and passed away in 1936. I'm just going to get comfortable here and, you know, kind of sit down a little bit and tell you guys a story. Now, George here was born February 3rd in 1890 in Pike County, Kentucky. He was the son of Thomas Phillips of Logan County, West Virginia, and Martha Clementine Akert, who was born in Virginia. Thomas died decades before Martha did. He's back there. Later in life, she married into the Shoemate family, but when her time came, she was buried with her original family under the Phillips name. George grew up in the coalfield region along the Tug Fork Valley. Like many men raised here in these hills, he eventually went to work in the coal mines. Over time, he became a mine foreman, a position that carried quite a bit of responsibility, not only for his own work, but also for the men working underneath him. Now, George married O.C. Amy Gregory, right here, Phillips, and the two made their home near here. According to his death certificate, George was 46 years, 1 month, and 22 days old when tragedy struck. On March 23rd in 1936, George was working underground in the coal mines when an accident happened. His arm was caught and torn off by a coal cutting machine back in the coal mine. He was rushed out of the mine and taken to the hospital. Doctors tried to save his life, but the injury was just too bad. The death certificate states that George died from shock following the traumatic loss of his arm and the amputation surgery that followed. In severe industrial accidents like that, even when surgeons attempted to remove the damaged tissue and control bleeding, the body could go into what doctors called traumatic or surgical shock. Massive blood loss, extreme pain, and the stress placed on the body by both the injury and the emergency operation often proved fatal back in the 1930s, even when medical staff did everything that they could. George lingered for 2 days after the accident. Then on March 25th in 1936, George Ezra Phillips died. At the bottom of his death certificate, the injury is described more specifically as being caused by a coal cutting machine that tore off his arm. Coal cutting machines were large machines used in underground mines to cut the coal seam before blasting and loading. They used heavy steel bars fitted with sharp cutting bits or chains that move rapidly along the face of the coal. If a worker's clothing, a tool, or a limb got caught in the machine, the force of the moving cutters could pull you directly into the cutting teeth in a split second. Accidents involving these types of machines were among the most feared dangers in early 20th century mining. After George's death, his body was brought back across the Tug Fork River to this cemetery here in Burnwell, Kentucky. He spent his life working in the coal fields that helped shape the entire region, and like many miners of his time, one moment underground ended everything. Now he rests here in the Phillips Cemetery, in the very same rugged valley that holds the stories of the Hatfields and McCoys, the sorrow of Rosanna and her lost child, and the lives of countless coal miners who built their homes along the Tug Fork River. Life was never easy, and while we're here, we'll use this opportunity to tell you about George's daughter, who died 14 years before him. So we'll let Heather take over from there and tell you that little story.
Maude was born on October 17th, 1921, here in the mountains of southern West Virginia. She was the daughter of George Ezra Phillips and O.C. Amy Gregory, a young family living in the coal camps of Logan, West Virginia. Like so many families in these valleys, their lives were tied to the mines, the railroads, and the small communities that grew up around them. Maude never had the chance to grow up in that world. She lived only 10 months. According to the doctor who attended her, Dr. Annie Hale, the child became gravely ill during the final month of her life. The record states that she suffered from meningitis for about 30 days. That disease inflames the delicate coverings of the brain and spinal cord, and in the early 1900s, there was very little doctors could do to stop it. The record also notes another illness in the background of her sickness. Tuberculosis was listed as a contributing cause. In those years, tuberculosis was common in coal towns and mountain communities, spreading easily through crowded homes and camps. When it infected a child, it could weaken the body and allow other deadly infections to take hold. In babies, tuberculosis can sometimes travel through the bloodstream from the lungs and reach the brain. When that happens, it can infect the thin protective layers around the brain and spinal cord. That form of the disease causes meningitis. Once the infection reaches the brain, the swelling and pressure can become deadly, especially for infants whose bodies are still developing. In the early 1920s, tuberculosis was one of the most feared diseases. Disease was still claiming thousands of lives across the region each year, and many families in coal towns, like those around Logan County, had lost relatives to what people often called consumption. Entire households could become sick, and children were especially vulnerable because their immune systems were still developing. In 1922, doctors had almost no effective treatment for tuberculosis or meningitis. Antibiotics had not yet been discovered, and medicines that could kill the tuberculosis bacteria would not be developed until decades later. Physicians could try to keep a patient comfortable, reduce fever, and support the child as best they could. But once the infection reached the brain, there was little they could do to stop it. For many children in those years, the illness slowly worsened over days or weeks, bringing fever, weakness, and severe inflammation before death. That is likely what happened to Maude during those 30 days recorded on the record. On August 17, 1922, Maude Frances Phillips died before reaching her first birthday. The next day, August 18, 1922, she was laid to rest. The funeral arrangements were handled by the Logan Muncie Company of Logan. Her father, Ezra Phillips, was listed as the informant who provided the family details. Just 10 months of life written down in a few lines of ink on an old record. But behind those lines was a real child, born to a young family in the coal fields of southern West Virginia. Medicine has changed greatly since that time. Today, tuberculosis is treated with powerful antibiotics that can kill the bacteria responsible for the disease. Patients are given a combination of medications over several months to fully clear the infection from the body. When tuberculosis spreads to the brain and causes meningitis, doctors now treat it aggressively with those same antibiotics, along with medicines that reduce inflammation and swelling around the brain. Hospitals can also support infants with advanced care that simply did not exist in the 1920s, monitoring breathing, controlling fever, managing fluids, and treating complications early. Because of those advances, many children today recover from infections that would once have been fatal. If a baby developed the same illness in 2026, doctors would likely diagnose the infection through blood tests, spinal fluid testing, and imaging of the brain. Treatment would begin quickly with targeted antibiotics and hospital care. While tuberculous meningitis can still be dangerous, many children now survive and go on to live normal lives when treatment begins early. Maude Frances Phillips was born in a time before those medicines existed. Her life lasted only 10 months, and her story survives today through the fragile record of her brief life, and today they are remembered.
And I guess that just about wraps up our little visit here today. Come out and tell you guys a couple old stories from way back years ago. Some very interesting stories, and quite frankly, there's quite a few lessons to be learned as well. As with just about any grave with any story, you know, you pick any grave anywhere and there's a story behind it, and these are no different. Amazing stories by amazing people. They don't have to be rich, they don't have to be famous. Sometimes it's the you and I, you know, like I said, like I've been saying all day. Sometimes it's the you and I of the world that strange things, unexpected things happen to. Sometimes we do things that make us well known, and sometimes things simply happen to us that make us well known. But anyway, guys, we appreciate y'all coming out with us today and coming out seeing some of this beautiful scenery here today and hearing our little story. So I guess until next time, everybody, we will see y'all later. Hillbillies out.